Right, we're live. Well, Ben, thank you for jumping on.
Thank you, James. Thank you. Happy to be here.
Are you okay to give us a brief overview of your background and how you got to where you are?
Sure, yeah. So my name is Ben. I'm the CTO and co-founder here at Zafran. And prior to Zafran, actually, I was a first employee and VP research at Seri Security. I was there for 6 years. And before that, I had 9 years in the intelligence corps in the IDF, where I was a low-level reverse engineer, developer, and then also a vulnerability researcher. So I live in Israel. I'm part of the ecosystem of cybersecurity in Israel. As many Israelis, I've been as many Israeli founders. I grew up and learned about cybersecurity from my years in the intelligence corps. But I'm also just a nerd and a geek, and just a guy that likes to break things, but also to build things. So both sides of that.
That's awesome. Did you say you were the first or second employee with Armis?
I was the first one.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's pretty huge. They're a pretty big presence in the space.
They are. I owe a lot to Evgeny Nadir, the co-founders there, that I had the chance to work with and to learn from on how to build a company and how to do a lot in the space and to make a difference. And I think Zafran is in many ways another chapter in that book of cybersecurity companies that are aiming to close the loop between finding about an issue and being able to remediate it as quickly as possible. Where ours is a great asset management tool and they're also a player in this wider space that we are now calling CTEM or continuous threat exposure management. Zahran has begun its journey or was founded on the idea that we wanted to take on that last mile of the actions on how to actually reduce risk by mitigating vulnerabilities, by being able to remediate them at scale. So we are part of the same ecosystem, but we have different roles. At least that's how I view it.
Yeah, okay, cool. And I guess you've touched on one of the points there. You must have learned a whole lot being that sort of employee number one and watching them grow to where they are. So where did the whole Zafran idea come from then? What was that kind of light bulb moment?
Yeah. Well, I was at Armis back a few years ago, and there was a major cybersecurity incident in a hospital in Israel, where ransomware was widely deployed, and actually the entire hospital was without any computers for a few months until they recovered.
Wow.
Some patients were required to go to other hospitals, and doctors and nurses were communicating over WhatsApp, and so without any actual IT systems. So it was a major event in Israel, which has six, I think, large hospitals, and so if one of them goes down, or at least in that way, it impacts the lives of Israelis immediately.
Mm.
Um, and the armies was deployed in that hospital. We had some data that was helpful for understanding how that attack happened, and also for the recovery of that hospital. And I was leading the research department at Armis, and actually knew some other leaders, specifically Sanaz, who later became our CEO at Zafran. And Sanaz was leading Mandiant's site in Israel in the Middle East. And Mandiant is a leader in cybersecurity services and specifically in IR, in the investigation of incidents. Um, and so they were doing the IR of this event, and we cooperated and had a partnership between Armis and Mandiant to try and get to the root cause of how this attack unfolded and what was the patient zero of it, and understand how to avoid that situation for other organizations or specifically hospitals in Israel. Um, and what we found in that attack is that it was a known vulnerability on one of the servers on the perimeter of that hospital that was not patched in time for several months. An attacker actually just needed to find that server on the internet and exploit that vulnerability, and that led them straight into the hospital. And from there, they took over major systems in the hospital and eventually were able to really deploy a very, very wide ransomware that every single computer in that environment was impacted, really like a nightmare scenario for such an organization.
Mm.
It was a very definitive, or let's say awakening moment for me as a vulnerability researcher to see the real world impact of an attacker taking advantage of a vulnerability and exploiting an organization in that fashion, because it was very much real and not theoretical anymore, right? And while I was part of cybersecurity operations in my army days, this was definitely a different ball games in terms of the damage, in terms of the impact that it made. And so that work with Sanaz and Sneer that was also involved, our third co-founder, was a driver to see how do we create something that helps organization actually avoid this moment in time of them being taken over by a ransomware, especially when it comes to a very preventable type of attack
Mm.
from a known vulnerability, from something that was already known for some time, but the organization was not able to patch it in time.
Got you. And I guess sort of leading on from that, then that's the whole sort of position of Zafran in the market. So I guess broadly speaking, what's your view of where we are in terms of threat and exposure management right now?
Yeah, well, we are definitely in the crux of some inflection points. We know that the challenge of creating code has gone down significantly, and this is because of AI and the potential of anybody with a keyboard or maybe without a keyboard to give some instruction to an AI and then generate code. And that code that it generates, it's not secure, right? It's not necessarily a secure code. And so that's one very major thing that is just shaping the industry in terms of how does organizations create code, ship code, manage that code. This is a trend that is going to impact us in the next decade or so until, I don't know, AGI hits, and then it looks even more different. But other than that, we also know from the last 5 years that attackers have chosen to focus on vulnerability exploitation as the number one a method for them to get into organizations. And they are become so quick and effective at this that Google just recently published a report that it now takes them -1 days to exploit vulnerabilities. What that means, that very strange terminology, is that if there were cases where in the past a vulnerability was published and then it took them some days to create an exploit, now it's being patched as a 0 day, essentially when there is already 1 day of an exploit existing in the wild, right? So essentially when a vulnerability hits the news, now you have your clock, there is a clock against you as a defender to go ahead and find your impact and address that as soon as possible, where for the attackers, they already have on average a day in advance that they're now using these new vulnerabilities. So in one sense, this is an indicator of the fact that it's becoming harder and harder for vendors to keep up and releasing patches quickly. But it also means that attackers will become much quicker at exploiting vulnerabilities. So maybe three things that there I touched on, right? The difficulty to release patches and to deploy patches.
Mm.
It's not becoming easier right now, not yet. The speed in which attackers are exploiting vulnerabilities and are being able to utilize bugs that are in software much quicker for their advantage. And third, the fact that there is more and more code being generated by AI, which is coming without security built in. And so more bugs and more security issues are introduced. And so time, in essence, is shrinked on all of these fronts.
Yeah, it seems to be a real kind of like perfect storm at the moment of, rise of capabilities, like you say, all the points you touched on there. So I guess there's a huge space here for something like Zafran to fit in. So how does like Zafran look at this problem? How does it solve it? What's the sort of play here?
So two or maybe one and a half of these 3 points that I mentioned were already in effect, let's say, for the last 3, 4 years. The time to exploit, how much it takes attackers to exploit a vulnerability has shrunk down from months to days to minutes now over the last 10 years or so. And this is why it's becoming the number one vector for attack. And Zafran entering this scene 3 years ago when we were founded, understood that the biggest challenge for organizations is understanding the context of their security controls as it relates to their posture issues. So I might have a vulnerability on a very important asset of mine, but if I have an EDR on it, a firewall, a WAF, an IPS protecting it with specific configurations in place, that asset might actually be very well protected. And then another asset maybe doesn't have these controls, or it has them without the proper configurations. It might be exposed. So for the attacker's point of view, it does not care, how many assets you have or how many security tools you have. It cares about these few cases where you don't have it configured correctly, and that creates an exposure. And this is also an opportunity for the defender, because the defender, if it knows what is the right way to configure these tools, it can actually mitigate many percentage of the posture issues that it has, and really reduce that attack surface to a very small percentage, a very small number of assets. And then for again, coming back to where we were founded, we wanted to connect the two dots. We wanted to tell the defender, here's the way for you to mitigate the risk as quickly as possible, to mitigate that risk of an attacker moving fast and exploiting vulnerabilities using your existing controls. And so this is how we entered this thing 3 years ago. And now looking at our current position and the future, we are now understanding that there is much more potential to give tools to defenders to not only mitigate the risk using their existing controls, but also remediate at scale using AI. So we've just launched our agentic remediation capabilities. We're going to go into that, and I'm guessing a bit more in depth. But in short, it's how do we automate the creation of remediations, the remediation process, by giving agents the ability to, with control, with guardrails, with human in the loop, but the ability to actually remediate vulnerabilities in the enterprise.
Understood. Okay, cool. So if we put the agentic remediation piece to one side for a moment, so Zafran effectively says that you as a customer, we've looked at your whole organization. Here's where those specific vulnerabilities are that are going to cause a problem for you, and here's how to fix them. Have I got that right?
Yeah, you got that correct. I think even that first half of that questions, here are the ones that are going to create potential breach, right? Here are the ones that are most exploitable. There are so many factors to understand when you're trying to predict that type of information. It's very important to distinguish a case where you have a product or a service that tries to exploit vulnerabilities or tries to pen test an environment, and maybe it found some issues. It probably missed a bunch of other issues, but it worked on the basis of I have a test case, I'm trying to run it. If I'm successful, there's an issue, right? So it's a checklist kind of approach. Zafran's approach, which I think is the only relevant approach for large enterprises, is a statistical kind of analysis, meaning we take into account all of the data, all of the context, and we calculate essentially what are the risks in the organization based on many different risk factors. So we understand which assets are internet facing, which ones might be accessible from the outside of the network. This is not a solved problem in any way or matter. Like each organization has different network appliances, different ways to create inbound traffic for internet to reach assets. But that is really essential to understanding what is the attack surface of that organization. So this is one risk factor. Understanding what piece of software is in use, is in a runtime, and thus the vulnerabilities in it are much more important, is another risk factor that you need to take into account. And then that third point about that's the security controls. So do I have an EDR in place? Do I have another tool that actually protects me? So all of that distills down to here are the vulnerabilities that are both internet facing, that are in runtime, and they have no proper mitigated control against them. And that is can allow you to take 100 million vulnerabilities that an organization is impacted by all the way down to 10. Right? And these are the 10s that have really passed all of these tests and checks to be considered very, very, very risky. And you are unable to find them within hacks, a bunch of noise if you don't have proper data and proper risk factors.
So you're finding the needle in the haystack, the ones that actually matter,
Yes.
and here's how to address them. Okay, cool. So I mean, Zafran seems to be going from strength to strength. So what are your customers saying that is I guess different about Zafran than maybe other tech and sort of processes on the market?
I think what they're realizing, our customers, is we're the first tool in this space that really acknowledges their environment. So you can think of it, there are many vendors that came in and gone in our space that has tried to say, I'm going to find that needle in the haystack. I'm going to be the one that prioritize the noise for you. Almost all of them, their approach was what I call red side prioritization, meaning they took some signal like threat intelligence, like cyber insurance calculations, and try to say, okay, because I know that in the wild attackers are using this CVE or this vulnerability, then this CVE is probably important to all enterprises, to all companies. But they really didn't try and consider the environment of the organization. Again, internet-facing runtime, security control, all of these factors that are very different from one customer to another. So what our customers are telling us is now it's tailor-made for my environment, right? So each customer knows that when risk is prioritized by our platform, it is being done giving the environmental lens of its own tenant or of its own environment, which is really difficult to do at scale, and why many solutions have avoided that approach before us. But it is actually what makes sense when you're trying to protect an organization. I don't care if I have something that would make another organization at risk in its setting. I care what it means to me. How does it impact my organization?
Understood. Got you. Okay, cool. And then so recently then you mentioned earlier you've just announced the agentic remediation piece. So layering that on top of what we've already got, how does that look in the real world?
Right. Yeah, so we talked about all of this data that we are mapping, right? All of this context. So internet facing, runtime, reachability, and also security controls. Before you add AI to this is already a powerful platform, already a platform data set to work with. But really, it still requires some human intervention or human in the loop to ask the correct questions about this data and to be able to wisely filter and search for relevant insights within it. So before getting into the remediation piece, which I'll touch into a moment, I think what we find is that translation of I want to hunt for something very important for me in my organization, and I can do it with this tool without AI, or I can do it with AI. The potential of AI here is to be a very, very, very good interface between a question or a statement by a customer. I care about this asset. I want to search for stuff that relates to this business unit, find the most exploitable threat in that part of that organization. And really iterating over the data quickly and finding the insights is something that an agent and an agentic capability does very differently and very effectively than without it. And it's being able to do that in our platform today because we have a great data lake and a great way to interface that data. We have all of this context that we've accumulated. Essentially, we have good data to work with for an agent that otherwise we'd need to find a way to collect that data. So taking the platform piece away from the AI would have made the AI really incapable to treat this problem space. But together with the data and with AI, there is a potential here to take it to the next level. And then comes into the remediation part, right? So We have one piece of tech that we didn't touch on yet, which is our way to interact with endpoint servers in the cloud or on-prem via existing agents. So we develop integrations, very deep integrations with existing tools like your CrowdStrike EDRs or your native cloud native agents that you have in the cloud that allow us to pull data directly from the endpoint or run these read-only commands on the endpoint. And this is was developed, before AI. The purpose of this was to add much more context from the hosts themselves about the vulnerabilities that impact them, runtime data, internet-facing data, stuff like that. What we found is that this is a very effective tool to then combine with the agents. So essentially, we have this maybe a triangle of conditions, of three conditions why AI here can be very effective. One is that data lake, that scale, the ability to query the data, all of this context by the agent. The second piece is the fact that we have that real-time access to the endpoint to evaluate conditions on that endpoint to simulate the effects of a potential patch. And then ultimately, if the user wants to also deploy the patch via this interface, and we have human in the loop, secured way to do this, to combine the two elements. And so an agentic remediator, in this sense, what it does, you ask it to find something in your data lake that you care about, that you want to remediate. You ask it to understand how the patch would work, and you give it access to the endpoint or to the server to interactively, with an approval by a user, run commands that allow it to fine-tune remediation steps and remediation plans all the way down to a script that now is ready to use a remediation plan that can be executed by an admin or by IT or DevOps. And that is something that we really didn't have, or the industry didn't think about, connecting security and IT so closely together that when a vulnerability is handed over to IT, it's just a push of a button and remediation can occur. We didn't have that because we didn't have all of this context and all of the tech that is needed for that.
Wow. So it's obviously making things a lot more secure. It's shortening that exposure window, but it's taking huge headaches away from a process point of view as well.
Well, I think that's where organizations will need to adopt a bit. When looking about this type of innovation, I completely agree with your point of view that there is a potential here to take many of the process out of it. You want to make sure that there is a clear line that defines where security ends and where IT is involved, right? And what is the change management operations that are needed. But the potential of security to be driving, let's say 99% of the remediation process, all the way down to deploying the patch. And maybe for some organizations, security should also have the potential to do that piece as well, depending on the environment, maybe, or the size of the organization. But many organizations still operate with some antique or outdated processes. They do need everything to be followed in a certain way, which is part of the reason that they are slowed down so significantly. I think that automated patching and the ability to remove humans from this loop eventually is still away from us. It's not likely to occur. I don't know, for large enterprises in the next couple of months. It will take more, but I think that it is now within reach. I do think that you can envision the human initially being part of the loop for every type of remediation that occurs, like they are today in many cases, where the agents will be simulating a patch or creating some reports about the potential impact. Even the humans much more context and automation potential with its capabilities, but the human will initially still feel that he is required within that loop, right? That the agent will make mistakes, that the agent might produce something that is not completely feasible to implement. But the tech would improve, right? Over time, the human will feel this delivers reliable results, and I'm less needed as time goes.
Mm.
And then I do think that automated patching or remediation would occur in greater scale. And we really couldn't have imagined how this would have occurred prior to that, to this tech coming in.
Mm.
It is a problem, remediation or vulnerabilities. It's inherently a problem that has no deterministic solution, let's say. Right? Like each vulnerability has its own characteristics. Each patching process looks a bit different. But an AI does have that capability of solving out non-deterministic issues. So it
Mm.
needs to iterate a bit, it needs to speculate and validate its assumptions. It needs to operate like a scientist operates in its lab when it's trying to solve an unknown problem initially, right? And it's not yet intelligence, right? It's not that creative process necessarily, but it does have that iterative process that is required when you're building something or also when you're fixing something.
For sure. And I guess on the other side of that coin, we're talking about here using agentic AI and AI for remediation purposes. But how do you see the rise of more AI generated attacks shaping the future of exposure management?
Right. Um, yeah, it's funny the type of I don't know, FUD or like the few that exist behind this, because on one hand, there's always a reason to fear attackers being better at their job. Like you don't want them to exceed expectations, right? And they're quite good, or at least some of them are quite good already, and so there's reason to fear there. But you still need to consider the fact that what you're fearing is the attacker, the AI is maybe a force multiplier of the attacker. And you can understand that this can also be force multiplier for the defender. So I think that there are like again two points of views here. One is, will this make hackers better? I think it will make them faster. It will not make them better. There is still that creative process in cybersecurity and being a hacker that AI is not there yet. Maybe when AGI will hit, it will be. But right now, it helps automate some work for the attackers, but it's not actually introducing intelligence into the loop. Right? It's a different beast in a way. But so yes, there is reason to fear an attacker being quicker. But a defender can also be now quicker.
Mm.
Really, the thing to fear is an attacker being more intelligent, and I think we're not there yet. So yes, some concern about speed definitely should be taken into account, and defenders should now see how they can also utilize this technology to be at the same speed or the same time to exploit or time to defend to put in defenses as the attackers, and hopefully better, right?
Mm.
With more resources, with better tools. But the battle between the minds, between the mind of the attacker and the defender, is still between human minds. This is my point of view. I don't think that attackers have become yet smarter. They just become quicker.
Understood. That's an interesting take, actually. I've not heard that one before around, it's still a mind versus mind game. It's not necessarily agentic AI is going to come and take all of our money and crypto and shut down every commercial system going,
Well, maybe when it has that capability, then cybersecurity is not the only thing that we should care about. Like when the AI really takes over, we have other issues to concern.
Indeed. And so I guess just to close out here on a couple of questions, I guess if I'm an organization and I'm struggling with my exposure management piece, what one piece of advice would you give to me?
Yeah, I think there is really depends on where you're on this journey. On one end, I would say to the more advanced enterprises, you need to think how you're closing the loop between security and IT. This is essentially exposure window or the time it takes you to remediate exists because of million reasons.
Mhm.
But the most fundamental one that relates to organizational pains or organizational challenges is that distance between security and IT. And I think agentic remediation and giving security the more and more tools to close that gap I think that is the opportunity that tech now solutions can offer, and organizations need to adopt to that. On the other hand, there's obviously also the basics that many organizations are not yet managed to complete, right? So just asset management and vulnerability management and collecting the data in a good way and an effective way, and then going through the maturity curve of prioritizing based on their tech stack, and the defining correct processes for mitigating vulnerabilities and remediating them at scale. I think the most important thing about being a good defender is understanding that you're really understanding the attacker's point of view. So the attacker normally would be coming, from an unauthenticated position on the internet with only internet as its means to reach into another organization. It's not that there aren't other cases, but this would be the main, like 90% of the time, this is how it would occur. So understanding attack surface, where am I exposed? Not what do I have that is exposed, but where does it occur? Right? Where is internet reachability reaching into my environment? Where is the cracks that I have within my defenses? And then on that picture, I want to relay what are the potential vulnerabilities that I have that can be exploited. So connecting that point of views in 3D, understanding your organization is really difficult for most organizations. I think Zafran can be a great tool to help with that. And that point of view, in general, that it should be really adopted as widely as possible.
Understood, I got you. And then just lastly from me, I mean, Zafran's going from strength to strength already. Next 2 or 3 years, what's on the roadmap? What are you excited about?
Yeah, we think that there are many niche categories within CTEM that shouldn't exist in a world in consolidation. We want to take on as much of that scene as possible. We believe that we can be a replacement for legacy scanners. So we've launched at Black Hat our Discover model or detector. So we can replace now legacy scanners, and we can do it much better and much more continuous than they operated their part of the stack. We have also launched a year before our remediation operations model, which can help organizations manage the process of doing the remediation. And now coming into the AI age, we're launching our agentic capabilities. So looking ahead, I think we will be trying to offer organizations an end-to-end platform where you can discover, prioritize, operate the process, but also act on it with agentic capabilities. And that'll be really very new and different experience for defenders, not needing to stitch it together partial solutions, but really being able to solve it end-to-end within one platform. So looking forward to being able to tell that story and to deliver on it.
That's awesome, man. Well, like I said, a lot's happened already, and it sounds like there's plenty more in the pipe. So, looking forward to seeing that in the headlines and hearing about it. We darted around loads today. I fired loads at you. Thank you for sharing everything, and we'll chat soon.
Thank you, James. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Ben.